You have probably heard that Airbnb is dead. You also have probably heard that you can make $100,000 with just 2 minutes of work a day using Airbnb. But the sad truth is, it's actually probably somewhere in the middle of that. And that's what our guest did today on BiggerStays. Josh Wilson has built up an amazing arbitrage portfolio that is also giving him revenue, but building up his future and his business in the back end. He's built up systems, he has software and procedures in place, and now he is running a 6-figure, probably getting closer to 7-figure portfolio that I'm super happy to talk about today on BiggerStays. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of BiggerStays. My name is Garrett Brown. I am the BiggerPockets STR expert, and today we have another expert in the field right now. Josh Wilson has came on. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Super excited to talk about it. We've had quite a few people in the comments recently asking for more arbitrage things and just, how others have expanded their portfolio in the short-term rental Airbnb world, just besides going and finding a property and buying it and leveraging yourself out of that. And you started in the STR world building somewhat off of that arbitrage model. Can you just give a little bit of background for the people of how you got into real estate and what led you to short-term rentals and even more specifically the arbitrage side?
So real estate in general, my sister and brother-in-law have done a bunch of Burr properties in Pittsburgh where I grew up. And it's kind of always been kind of a topic for discussion and something I always wanted to get into at some point. So eventually when I had the financial capability to get into that, I started with long-term rentals, with flips. And we did this in Cleveland. And we did it remotely, and it worked out pretty well, but it just was not a repeatable business model, or it was, a few $100s a month, not really something that was active cash flow. It was something for long term, and we were looking for something a little more present and short term.
What brought you to short term rent? Was it just the cash flow? Like, how did you hear about it? Like, how did you know that the arbitrage model was the model that kind of was going to probably work for you best in the time?
My wife and I took our anniversary vacation to Scottsdale, where I went to college. We just kind of fell in love with the area. She really hadn't spent much time here. We ended up buying a second home, a vacation home. And with that, our plan was to come out here 3-4 times a year and then just put it on Airbnb in the rest of the time. And we bought it kind of heading into high season, going into the fall. A 4-bedroom house in Scottsdale, a real destination area, was just kind of an eye-opener with how much it could really earn for us. The other side of that is really that we had a lot of investment into that one property, and we knew we wouldn't be able to scale that. So once we saw that, we adjusted the model and started arbitrage in Pittsburgh, where, like I said, we were from.
Do you live in Pittsburgh, like when you're working, or were you doing this all remote?
Yeah, we lived in Pittsburgh at the time that we visited Scottsdale, but since then, we relocated to Scottsdale, and that's where we are now.
A lot of people get scared when they hear about the remote side of setting up a property or dealing with everything there. So you were in Pittsburgh when you started making this model. So we'll kind of start there. How did you find people to let you do arbitrage in some of these places? Everybody's sticking point is that they can't find, landlords or, people that own other properties to allow them to do this. So how did you figure out, to crack the code for that model, basically?
I just made some calls based on Zillow. So I just went onto Zillow. I had some metrics that I wanted to look for, 2-3 bedroom apartments or houses. I probably made 20 or so phone calls before I got a few responses. I ended up getting a response from a realtor who was listing an apartment for rent, and it was a name that I recognized. And it turns out that he's someone that I had a loose association with in high school. So whenever I went there and I toured the property in person, I was able to build on that old time connection. And maybe that helped a little bit, because once that one was approved, that realtor also said, oh, hey, by the way, my girlfriend has a house downtown. Would you like to rent that as well? And so that got us to 2 really quickly.
I tell people all the time, closed mouths don't get fed. It's like, if you're not making calls and you're not okay with hearing no, you're probably never going to make that leap that you need to even get into your first few ones. So you seem like you took that chance. The first 2 properties, let's just break down those before we talk into how you've grown in the past few years as well, which is super impressive. Let's tackle the first property. If you can remember these numbers, how much did it cost you to furnish that property? Do you have any estimate of that?
I made a lot of mistakes with this one.
Of course.
The first one, I was trying to do a hands-off approach as much as possible still. And so even though I was local, I was still having a full-time job. And so I was still trying to do things as hands-off as I could. And so I found a company that specializes in design, furnishing, setup, and would basically do everything for you. That 3-bedroom apartment ended up costing me around $15,000, which is just mind blowing to me for my market. It didn't end up working out well at all. Obviously, at least the furnishing side of it, we've recovered since then for that property. But ultimately, they just kind of ghosted me. They had everything delivered. There were times where it was raining and I would have to run 15 minutes down the road and put everything in the garage. And then it was weeks and weeks and weeks where no one was assembling anything. So ultimately, it took me about a month personally where I would get up at 5 a.m., drive over to this place, assemble a bed, go back to work, and then do the same thing 7 days a week. And so eventually it got up and running. And this is the apartment that my family uses when we go back home to visit our relatives. So it's a special one and we wanted to make sure we did it right, but it took a long time to get up and running.
Your first property, if it's a home run, you're probably one of the luckiest people ever because everybody like takes their lumps on their first property. I took them, like everybody I talked to, and that kind of is like a rite of passage into getting into something bigger that I feel like. So then you got a house you acquired in that through that realtor you said, am I correct?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll say walk through that one for a little bit of the setup and things there.
Yeah, so that one was already furnished. It was basically they were at the point in their relationship where they were going to move in together and they weren't sure what they were doing with this house yet. And so it was furnished really well designed, and it was in a nice area. So I just had to basically take over the lease and start listing it. And I used the photos that they already had, and that one went live really quickly. Eventually we let go of that lease, ultimately the numbers weren't high enough for us to continue there, but it did work out.
Break down the numbers just quickly on those first two. Like if you remember them, you can kind of ballpark estimate them. How much were you paying on your lease per month? How much were you paying in some expenses? And then, were you making income off of this, or was it all kind of getting tied up in the operation side?
For the first one, the 3-bedroom apartment, that one's $2,400 a month. And between different utilities like electric, water, internet, and so on, that's probably another $250 a month. And so once we went live, we were doing really well there. And we've continued to do really well there. We were lucky enough to get some long-term tenants over the winters, traveling nurses, some other types of people like that are there for 30 plus days. And they help us make a little bit. Basically, our goal is just to break even. But during the high months, we're at $6,500 to $7,000 in revenue. So a few $1,000s a month in profit typically on that.
Awesome. No, those are definitely, even for your first deal and all the stuff that you went through, I'm sure those are pretty solid numbers from most of the things I hear out there. How about the house? How did that one kind of play out in your first deal?
So we took that one over a couple months later, which was headed right into slow season in Pittsburgh. And so the problem there was that homes don't perform well in slow season because you don't really have families traveling other than actually Christmas or maybe a university that's in town, someone for graduation. Beyond that, there's 2-3 months where it's just really slow. And so we ended up having that for about 8 or 9 months. And then the owner, that realtor, they approached us and said, "Hey, are you going to renew? Because if so, we want to increase the rent a little bit, but if not, we're going to sell the property." And so I just said, let's just go ahead and sell it because at that point I had shifted my focus a little bit more to actually downtown into apartments.
Nice. Yeah. And you didn't have any furniture in it or anything. So it was kind of like a wash your hands, learn everything you did and go to the next one. And a lot of people that I've talked to that, do arbitrage, once the owners kind of find out sometimes like what you're renting it for. And if you're making, they're like, "Oh, I want to get a little greedy and got to raise the rent on them or sell it," so that's a typical thing. So you pivoted your models. Tell me about your new model, and how that next year or two kind of progressed for you as you decided on like what you see actually is working in the market for you.
So again, I just went back to Zillow, started making calls. I checked out Craigslist and some alternative sources too. I just didn't really find the people that I talked to there to be very reputable or trustworthy. So I didn't really follow through on that because there were enough leads through Zillow that were coming in. And so I initially hired a virtual assistant who was going to do the initial outreach. And then basically I just take the next level of the funnel. And so I made those calls. I talked to the property managers directly after there was some level of interest. It took maybe 2 or 3 weeks to get someone. And the person that I got was a very nice woman, was a minority owner of a small building downtown with 20 or so apartments in it, 1 and 2 bedroom apartment mix. And so I went there and visited. And it was a really cool place that has a lot of exposed brick, kind of industrial, but also very updated. Has a great view of the city, great rooftop deck and everything. So they actually wanted me to take 7 properties right away, 7 apartments. And at the time, this was before I really lined up the funding for how I should do that for short term. And I didn't have the ability to do that. So I started with 1, and just over a few months later, I just added 1 and 1 more. Eventually, I think I have 5 in that building now. Co-host a 6th. It's a great building, and that one's really kind of where I decided that apartments is kind of the model that I want to pursue.
Let's kind of just break down that building that you're working in there now. You said you have 5 units and you co-host a 6. So take the 5 arbitrage units, for example. What do you think your average rent is, your average expense, and then also the average income from the actual properties, if you guessed on averagely across them?
Yeah, so their average, I would say, rent is probably about $1,900. There's a few that are closer to 16, and then some of the larger 2 bedrooms are 24 or so. Expenses again around $250, and so those ones do really well. My very first one there, in the first 12 months, we did about $13,000 profit with the 1 bedroom, and the second one was a 2 bedroom, and that did $18,000 in profit. All summer long, it's in a great area downtown. It's walkable to basically everything there is. There's sporting venues, concerts, theater. It's in a great area, very safe. They were basically fully booked.
Awesome. All right, did you just put them on Airbnb only and just kind of put them out there, or what was your plan to get some of the bookings in?
That was our initial plan, Airbnb only. I did try VRBO initially, and we really didn't get much. With our home in Scottsdale, we actually got probably 75% from VRBO. And it's just a little different because, higher end tenant or guest, I guess, with a larger number of guests tend to have different sites that they prefer. So Airbnb we were fully booked with that. Didn't really find anything from VRBO. More recently, we've expanded to a couple different platforms, but for that first year, it was just all Airbnb.
I've seen that across with VRBO. It's a great product, but there's a few markets that they kind of dominate in, and it's always bigger homes. It kind of seems like, families really are looking for VRBOs, and they have their own kind of demographic. So I'm not surprised by that statistic. How are you managing it all? As you're working a full-time job, and how are you kind of managing the operations, the cleaning, and the guest messaging? And then what did you make mistakes of that you've corrected in your operations going forward?
So my very first cleaner that I had for the 3-bedroom property, I didn't find out until it was too late that they took Sundays off. So even if it shows up on the calendar for them, they just didn't tell me. It happened a couple of times, and then finally they said, yeah, we don't do that on Sundays. And so I initially started blocking check-ins that day to accommodate them when I really didn't know a whole lot. And then it became too difficult. There were too many inquiries, or I was leaving too much money on the table. And so I just pivoted to a different cleaner who was willing to have someone there any day. And that's the team that I've been working with. It was a family team. The wife led the cleaning side, and the husband led the maintenance side. And so he handles all the setups for me and any issues we have.
That is the STR Dream Team right there, where the wife or husband handle one side of the cleaning, and then the wife or husband handle one side of the maintenance. That is always the best fit you can find if you can find that pair. And then other advice that I give out to a lot, which you obviously have learned, is you need a company with some people under them. If you have an individual cleaner, you got to have a backup, because you never know when that person could be sick. You never know when that person could get a flat tire, or you just need time off. They want to go on a vacation, and so those operations kind of button up as you go across. Are you using any software to manage your cleaners, like Turno or anything like that? Or how are you working on that?
Yeah, so we used Turno for a while, just recently switched to Breezeway. But the biggest part of our automation really, or for my time, is my virtual assistants now. And so over time, I slowly added more, but now I have a team of 3 assistants that work from 7 a.m. to midnight or so, 7 days a week. And so my time is really answering their questions, maybe 15 minutes a day.
Nice. That's awesome. So exactly how you need to be setting it up, and you've kind of seen how you've scaled it, and then you started adding quite a few more units. So how many units are you at now currently? I know you've shifted just a little bit here and there.
So we are at 17 of our own, and then 3 co-hosted units as well.
So when did the big expansion come, or was it slowly one by one, or like how did you get to that next level of units there?
So it did come with a pretty big expansion. And so the first building that I was in, that same owner also owned a different building in a different area of downtown. But again, same type of thing where there were multiple units available, had a great city view, was going to make for some great listing photos. And so that's how I expanded to my first 7 units between those 2 buildings. After that, I ended up taking over some other units from a host that was no longer looking to host in the area. And so I quickly acquired 16 more units. And this was a pretty big learning experience, I would say. Although it was directly across the street from my first building that was really successful, everything was completely different. The quality of the building was not nearly the same. The size of the units was nowhere close. And so I was in a really difficult position because at this point I'm thinking I want to scale as fast as I can with this model because I'm so confident in the success that I've had in this previous building. And the opportunity came along when I was on vacation in Hawaii. And so 4 a.m. or whatever, I'm up and trying to confirm these places as well as I can, but there's just not much you can do without seeing it in person. And I had to make a decision, either take the risk and, accept these leases sight unseen, or wait. And then I definitely would lose it because there were other people that were interested. So I took the risk. I did it. It had some ups and downs and there's some horror stories that came along with that. But ultimately it led to later growth and other relationships. There's a couple partnerships that I think I'm going to have in the future because of people that I met through that.
Yeah, I've been a real estate agent for 8 or 9 years, and it's a common saying within like the agent world. If you want to do a deal, just go on vacation because your phone's going to blow up at that point. So that's kind of what I've seen most of the time. So you're right in line there. So let's break down what were some of the mistakes or the horror stories that kind of came with this unit, which led to future growth. I like highlighting mistakes out there. But I've been in the same boat before where it's like, there's been some times where I've said yes to an opportunity and it doesn't necessarily pan out with that opportunity, but it opened a door for the biggest opportunity or a bigger opportunity that I wasn't expecting. So I always emphasize to people, especially when you're just getting, you're trying to get it going, like you're going to say yes to some things that may not work out, but in the long run, it might work out in a bigger picture than you see. So walk through some of the mistakes that came about, things you learned from this deal, and how you pivoted to the next one to be ready for it.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like a mountain. Like every mountain goes up and down, but eventually, if you zoom out far enough, you're going to be heading in the right direction. But you're going to have some setbacks, and so that's just kind of the way that I would look at this. So the first thing was that we took over heading right into summer, almost July 4th, I think was the first weekend. And so we have this fully booked weekend across 16 units, and we ended up giving refunds on at least half of them. We didn't realize the quality of the sheets, of the towels, of those types of things were just not really appropriate for anyone. And so there were just constant reorderings and people running all over the place trying to get the guests the supplies that they need. And, I ended up with a ton of 1-star reviews right at the beginning. So it took a long time to recover, both for my entire account, which I immediately lost superhost status, probably within a month or so. And then just for those individual properties, it took a while to get those back to a reasonable point where they weren't buried in search results.
What did you do to get it back on track besides, take care of some of the operations? Was there any high level things that, somebody could be listening to this and maybe have a struggling listing, or maybe they've gotten a few bad reviews? Like, what did you do to take that feedback and turn it into a positive for you?
At one point, you have to decide when you need to walk before you can run. And I think I was trying to run there. And we were under the expectation that we were taking over these properties and they're fully profitable, they're ready to go and everything. And when we found out that that wasn't the case, it was really hard to make the decision to basically pause them all and miss out right in the middle of summer for a few weeks to really reassess what we have and what we need to do to fix it. So we'd go in, we'd see that there's only 1 or 2 spoons for the silverware, or there's only 1 or 2 cups. So everything was bare bones. And so we had to first inventory all the different units, what everything was needed, and had to wait for all the supplies to come in and get everything delivered. And once everything was back to the standard that we have for the other properties, that's when we let people back in. And the majority of the properties were covered, but there were still some issues with the quality of the building and those types of things that were out of our control.
Do you still have units in that building, or did you get out of that and do another?
So that building really let me get into my next building where I have 9 units right now. The reason that one helped me get into it was because I interviewed directly with the owner and they were very curious about my footprint in the city or in the STR world in general. And if I was going to say, well, I have 7 units, I don't think they were going to be comfortable saying, okay, we're going to give you every free unit we have in the building. But I was able to say I have 25 units. It's a major difference. And ultimately it built the trust. And even though I don't have those ones anymore, things are going very well with my other ones.
How did you meet those owners of the new building? Was it through a mutual connection, or how did that kind of come about?
So building relationships with the people that you're working with throughout the process. And so they came to me through the property manager of the first building. The property manager knew that I was renting several of these apartments, what I was doing with them. They knew that they never really had complaints because we have noise monitors. We take care of issues immediately. We handle small maintenance things, so they never even hear from us. So once they were comfortable with us, they were working for other buildings too, and they floated the idea to them and then told us, maybe you should have a conversation with these other owners and see if that works out for you.
Nice. Love it. That's exactly how things should transpire if you're doing a good job and networking and get putting yourself out there exactly like you did. So, bravo for that. A lot of people take for granted when you got to take a few lumps to get to that bigger, the bigger picture that we talked about. So let's get to your portfolio today and talk about what are you doing now to increase your revenue at some of these properties that you're seeing, and then also maybe mitigate some of the expenses or also some of the headaches that you had before. Where are you at now in Josh's world of arbitrage?
Yeah, so last year we had a lot of amenities, I think. And so I think we cut out some of them where it didn't really make sense. We just needed a long enough period of testing to see if they were worth it. So one of the things was parking. Because in downtown, in a lot of major cities, the only place you're going to get on-site parking is in a hotel. We have parking garages that are close enough, but it still requires people to either park outside with their flashers on or roll a suitcase down a couple city blocks. And so for the most part, people were appreciative of it because it's still a cost every day that they have to pay $10, $20, $30 a day. And we were saving that for them. But ultimately, when we A/B tested it, a unit that had it and a unit that didn't, we weren't really seeing the amount that was helping. So we eliminated all that, saved a few $1,000s at least a month in parking. And so what we've tried to do this year heading into the high season here is try to optimize the properties that we have. And one of the things I've been doing is ChatGPT. I'm just taking my lead photos or my first couple photos and throwing it in there and saying, how can I make this as a more attractive listing photo? And it's just popping up with, add a plant here, add a mirror here, a couple things. And I'm spending $500 to $1,000 on optimizing these properties as opposed to investing $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 in new properties. And it's increasing the revenue so far.
That's awesome to hear. I'm a big fan of maximizing what you already have. Even as I always am working on my own portfolio and trying to expand, I also, before I go buy another property, I'm always like, how can I make sure that this exact one is as profitable as it possibly can be for the area I have? And, because it's easier to add a $5,000 or $6,000 hot tub than it is to go put up $50,000 or $60,000 to go buy a new property and hope it's, you're getting whatever kind of cash on cash return with today's interest rates and everything in between. So you've done a great job of building a business out of this, which I'm a huge fan of. And now you've set that infrastructure to keep expanding and not overwhelm yourself. I see a lot of people try to expand so quick and then they don't get the infrastructure under them to, support that. So beside you have 3 virtual assistants, and I see you're using ChatGPT and everything, which I'm a big fan of doing all of that. Do you still work full time, or are you just doing arbitrage and STR models now?
Yeah, so I do some consulting just to kind of fill the time and bring in the extra income, and then to have more income available to reinvest if the right opportunity comes along. But as long as it's only taking me, 15, 30 minutes a day, whatever it may be, up and down, there's times where I really don't do anything for days for that. And it feels like a waste to sit around and do nothing. It's great to say that it only takes me a few minutes a day. The other side of it is, my kids are in school. I can't pull them out all the time. So there's got to be something to fill the time. So
yeah, I'm not mad at that. What's your secret sauce? Is there any like big tip that you would have for somebody that's trying to manage properties less actively and, kind of get a little bit of their time back within this?
Yeah, I would say that, systems and automation is important. So we do have virtual assistants. We do use Breezeway with our cleaners, but we also use other software to automate the business too. So we rely heavily on property management software. So rather than going into Airbnb and VRBO and Booking.com and all these different platforms and setting up the listings and changing them in 3 places, we just do everything through a platform called Hostfully. And so we previously used a platform called Hospitable, but just due to the smart locks at one of our buildings, we had to make the switch. But for the most part, it's providing us everything we need. It gives us a direct booking website too. So if we ever have the opportunity to get the income that way, as opposed to on any direct booking or any platform online, then we're able to direct people that way too. So that's the biggest thing. Other than that, my background is I started a business maybe 14 years ago or so with a co-founder. I was the technical co-founder, and we basically took the same approach of slowed and controlled growth. And so I think I kind of have some background and experience in that that's definitely helped here, where we don't want to grow exponentially to the point where it can potentially just spiral out of control and we can create a lot of problems we don't need if we were just able to focus. So having the ability to say no to opportunities is important too.
Nice. Yeah, no, you can definitely scale way too fast and regret a lot of the things you'll take on. I'm sure we both made similar mistakes in that facet. So what do you have planned next? Like, are you planning on exploding in the arbitrage model, co-hosting, a little both, something different? Like, what's your plans for the future with this going on?
I want to diversify my risk within STR. What I want to do with that is I want to expand co-hosting, because there's a lot less risk in co-hosting overall, but I really think you have to operate your own properties before you get into co-hosting. No one's going to see you as an expert and hand over the keys to their business if you've never done it before. We have the processes and the team in place to handle that already. We have a plan in place for once we get to a certain threshold and we're not able to manage it with our 3-person team. We have a process and plan already in place to expand and to promote from within. Beyond that, I see expanding to a couple different cities as well. And the reason there is minimizing risk again for cities and regulations. So if some new regulations come into play in Pittsburgh and that becomes difficult to operate, then we still are up and running in 2, 3, 4, 5 other cities.
Well, how are you finding your co-hosting people that you're going after? Is it networking still? Is there another way that you've been kind of finding some properties, or what are you seeing in that front?
So the ones that we found have been through existing relationships just locally in the city. We do plan to do some more direct outreach, I think, and some more aggressive outreach or relationship building, I guess. We really haven't done that to this point. This is kind of our first dive into co-hosting. It was really first about optimizing our existing ones. We'll add some additional ones if the right opportunities come along. So again, through those same owners we're comfortable with or those same property managers. But beyond that, co-hosting is probably the next focus there. So I'm actually not someone who would do well as a realtor, I don't think. I'm actually a very passive type B personality. So it's not natural for me to even make these phone calls and cold calls and everything, but you get over it because you know that you have to do it to succeed. It's the same with co-hosting and with finding relationships there. It doesn't come natural to me, but we'll figure it out.
I can't confirm, as I am the same type of personality. I do not like being an agent. I've only do it now just for family and friends. I hated cold calling. I hated door knocking. I hated every bit of that. I still had to do it, and I got better with it, and it took time, and I still don't think I'm a rock star by any means, but I hated that as well. That's why I shifted more to fix and flips, and then I went to short-term rental investing myself because it was not for me. But there's a lot of power in being able to do that. So it's definitely very smart and a way to really kind of bring some people in. You've built up something great. Everybody wants to say like arbitrage is dead and it's such a terrible model and you can never do anything with that. And it's always refreshing talking to somebody that sees the value in it, sees the value in building a business, which there's no way to get around short-term rentals that it's going to be some type of business. It's going to be business attached with some form of real estate to it, no matter how you slice it. So kudos to you for that. If somebody's watching this right now and they have been on the fence about maybe getting their first property or maybe, reaching out to, trying to figure out arbitrage, because especially with today's, everything going on a macro level, it's a lot harder to get into properties and make one profitable that you're buying. What's one tip for somebody that's actionable today that they could listen to this and go, this is going to change my path going forward? I actually am going to take that leap and try to get into arbitrage.
I think it's to question the expertise you might hear as you're just scrolling through your phone. So when you see these reels and you see something that says Airbnb is dead, just do some research. Because I don't think it's dead. I think it's just maturing. It's not, the Wild West where like 5 years ago you could just throw up anything on Airbnb and it would make money. It's now there's more competition, and competition is good for the people that do it well. I think you just have to do research, but don't be afraid to get off the fence and actually take action, because like me or like you're most likely going to have some bumps along the way, but that's really kind of just on the path to success.
Yep. You can't fail until you quit, and you can't be great until you start. That's kind of one of my favorite things I like to say. And also take a grain of salt with everything you see online, because people will say Airbnb is dead, but then you'll have some other guru telling you that you can make $50,000 a month passively if you buy their course, and it's like, it's usually somewhere in the middle. It's not as profitable as people say, but it's also not as dead as people say. So kudos to you for that, Josh. I really appreciate you jumping on with us to give us some insight into somebody that's actively doing it and, really involved in the space. How can people connect with you if they had any questions or just, want to follow your journey or anything along those lines?
I'm just starting out online with, education, connecting to other people. But on Instagram, it's BNB with Josh.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll put it in the description of the show. And then if anybody has any questions or anything in the arbitrage world, feel free to reach out to Josh because he is crushing it out there and has a ton of information that I can see on a high level. And if you've watched it all the way to the end of the video, we're super appreciative of it. Let us know in the comments if you want a part 2 in a few months with Josh to see what progress he has going on. And we'll be ready for you anytime you come. Please subscribe if you're watching all the way here, and we'll see y'all in the next one. Take care, everybody.